are so multicultural. We are so multicultural, especially here in Ontario, that we often don't think about it when we're in another country. But the hard, cold truth reality of it is that sometimes culture supersedes biblical principle. You know, I remember being in a church, and it was an African church. I grew up in an African church. Long story, but I grew up in an African church, and I remember having earrings in. Right? I was a young guy, I was a young youth leader, having earrings, walking around, and I remember it drove the parents crazy. It drove them nuts that I had earrings, even to the point where I actually had little kids in the children's church sometimes come up to me after Sunday morning service and say, "My mommy and daddy told me you're going to go to hell because you have earrings." This is where culture supersedes biblical principle. We had teenagers in that church that were told that they wanted to have dreads and braids in their hair, but because in the Nigerian and Ghanaian culture, braids and dreads often in a male represented witchcraft, the parents wouldn't allow it. Right? Even though in the Canadian culture, we don't care. It's just style. It's just fashion. Just because you have it doesn't mean that you're worshiping Satan. It doesn't mean that you're slaughtering goats in your living room trying to cast spells. For them, it was just a fashion sense. And so the reason why this is so important is because here we're seeing something. We're about to see Isaac probably do the biggest thing he had ever done in his life. It's interesting that throughout the entire Bible, we actually know more about Jacob than we do about Isaac. We know more about Joseph than we do about Isaac. Right? We know more about David than we do Isaac. And this is Abraham's son. In fact, there's very little information which we're given about Isaac through the Bible. It's kind of like a very, very short, brief introduction for someone who carried the weight of God's promised chosen people. It's a dynamic that is interesting because Isaac now is about to do probably the most important thing that which we could read about within the Bible as far as his life is concerning. Isaac's position, obviously only having two children of promise, even though your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky, is kind of interesting that we don't really know a whole lot, so we're beginning to see probably the most biggest impact Isaac will have. And that is his ability to pass on that promise. But what we don't see is Isaac looking up to God and saying, "God, what do you want? Is this of your will?" We don't even read that. We don't even read Isaac going into prayer. In fact, Isaac even specifies, I'm at the end of my days. I'm at a point where I don't even know if tomorrow will be promised for me because I'm so old. I literally could die tomorrow. So we need to get this done today because I don't know. My days are at an end here. And yet, even though he's at an end, and even though what he's about to do will have ramifications across history, he yet still doesn't go before God, but rather just simply goes to the firstborn and says, "Go make me some food so that I may bless you." And this is an interesting part because we can often get to a place where we get comfortable, right? Christmas time is all about comfortability. That's the real truth about Christmas. It's about being comfortable. Whether you like Christmas or don't like Christmas, it's all about being comfortable. If you love Christmas, then you're going to embrace it with everything that which you have. You're going to go to the malls. You're going to get your candy cane latte. You're going to decorate your house inside and out, right? You're going to really, really embrace it. And for those who hate Christmas, I mean, it's completely in somewhat the same way, right? I'm not going to talk to any of my friends who love Christmas. I'm not going to go to the malls. I'm not going to go to Starbucks because everywhere I go, I'm going to hear Christmas carols and see Christmas-themed drinks and all of this stuff, right? It's all about comfortability and what we want. I remember one of the hardest things I had to do during Christmas as a child is that they would often put in, like, on commercials, charity commercials and advertisements, and sometimes you'd hear songs pertaining to Christmas, just the most saddest songs, right? Do they even know it's Christmas time, right? And you see children in poverty, you see broken homes, homeless people addicted. It's like, I don't want to see that during Christmas. This is the happiest time of the year. I don't want to see this. This is craziness. I would like even today sometimes when I hear like depressing Christmas songs, I'm like, nope. Where's Rudolph? Where's Santa? Right? Where's Jingle Bells? Because it's all about comfortability. It's about what we know. It's about what we know. That's really kind of the theme of the year. It's about embracing something that is so comfortable and so happy. And here we see Isaac doing something very similar in that what he did was he embraced a culture, his own culture, because this is what we do in our culture. In our culture, we bless the firstborn, right? That promise that which is given to me by my father, I must also do to my child. But you know, the interesting fact is that Isaac wasn't the firstborn. He wasn't the firstborn. Technically, he's the firstborn amongst his mom and his dad. But as far as him being the firstborn child of Abraham, he wasn't. There was someone else before him. And so even though he technically wasn't the firstborn among his father, he still tried to continue to carry down this cultural aspect of giving it to the firstborn. And so why is this all important? Because oftentimes, especially during the Christmas season, and even beyond, as we head into 2024, we could get so caught up with how we do things, right? I've been often told when it comes to change, right? I'm part of a ministry that has a very, very old tradition, right? You guys know me from Share We're Global, but prior to that, we were called the Gideons. And so for many ministries, right, there are a lot of ministries across the world, but the Gideons are actually probably one of the oldest. They were formed in, I think, like 1895 or 7 or something like that. They came to Canada in 1908. This is how old the ministry is. And as they were making a change and they were making a shift and trying to continue to make things relevant and hopes that the ministry doesn't die, there was a lot of pushback. I have members today, even though technically the Gideons don't exist in Canada anymore, they still exist in the U.S. and across the world. I still have members today that still say they're Gideons. And the interesting part about this is that when we do things as a ministry, it's hard for us to get the older members to come on board with what we're trying to do. And the reason why that is so difficult is because they're just stuck in doing what they've always done. I remember even one time I was asking them about a fundraiser that the chapter was trying to hold. And it wasn't going so well. And I said, well, why are you trying to do it this way? Right? You guys are trying to recreate something that you did 20 years ago, but 20 years ago you had 30 members to support you. You now only have 3. Why are you trying to do it this way? Well, it's the way we've always done it. And we can get stuck into a place of, even within our own relationship with God, in our own relationship with Christ, where we get so used to doing something that we never think about, well, maybe God is calling me out of my comfort zone. Maybe God is calling me to do something different this year. You know, as we gather together with family and friends and we begin to open up presents, I just got back from Chile. And it was, you know, last year's trip there was good. It was easy. This year's trip was very, very difficult. We went further south. So the further south you go, the poorer the country gets. And not only does it get poorer, but it gets colder. And so last year we were in like 30-degree weather, sunshine. It was a good time. We still had a lot of gospel and ministry work that needed to be done there. But it was an easier time. This time around, we got into the south of Chile. It was 5-10 degrees every single day. Like, I mean, we escaped Canada to get away from the cold, and we were embraced by cold. Actually, I called my mom one day to check up on my son, and she goes, oh, yeah, it's so great here. It's like 15 degrees. I'm like, how is it warmer in Canada right now in November? And it was freezing, and on top of it, it was raining. And the worst part about it is that because it was unusually cold and wet for that time of year, even in the south of Chile, all the places that we went to, whether it be schools, whether it be hospitals, whether it be churches, or even restaurants, there was literally no heat and no insulation. So we would be in a restaurant trying to have lunch or dinner, and we all had our coats on, we had our scarves on, right? Usually when you order like Coke or water, we're all there with coffee and tea, just trying to get the chill out of us, trying to eat with all this clothes on, right? It was so uncomfortable. But the amount of ministry that grew in that area, it was birthed out of a place of being uncomfortable. So many of us got to experience new things, experience new people, experience new cultures. There was a school that we went to, and so in the south of Chile, they become more what they call the indigenous, and they're called the Mapuche. And in that south, it's very similar to our indigenous people. So they worship the land, they worship nature, the trees, and the wind, and the sun, and everything else. And so we went to the school, and this teacher, who's very much involved within the Mapuche religion, didn't want us there. Hated it. She didn't want us there. She wanted us to leave, get out. Didn't look at us, didn't say hello. And as we went from classroom to classroom, presenting the gospel, talking with the kids, praying with them, listening to what they were going through and sharing our experiences and letting them know about God's love and how Christ died upon the cross for their sins so that they could be connected to God. Something changed in this woman's heart. This woman, within an hour, I'm not even joking you, church, within an hour, she went from wanting us to leave to now giving us a tour of the school, and now giving us a tour of the outside of the school. And she even got to a place where I walked up to her and I gave her a gift, something from Canada, something small, something simple. She jumped up with joy. She hugged me. She ran back to her into her office, and she grabbed just a little card that it was all that she could afford and all that what she had to give me, right? And the whole time we were doing this, it was freezing cold. It was raining. Oftentimes when we went to go present in the classrooms, we would just, even though we had to be at the center of the classroom, we would kind of usher our way closer to the heater, trying to get some heat because we were freezing. But it was birthed out of a place of being uncomfortable. And it's easy for us to always kind of fall back into what we know. This is the difficult part when it comes to all this, is that it's easy for us to fall back into something of which we know. Whether it be at your workplace, whether it be with your family, whether it be in the church, or just even out in the world. It's always easier for us to fall back into something that's more familiar, something that's more comfortable. Do you know that people who struggle with high anxiety, did you know that they are more likely to rewatch shows over and over and over again than those who don't struggle with anxiety? And the reason why is because it's easier for them to watch through shows that they've already seen to be able to deal with the anxiety, whatever that show may cause or bring, than to have to take on a new show. This is the level of which we face anxiety and depression here in Canada, that we're terrified to even watch new shows. Right? We go through Netflix and Disney Plus and Prime and Crave, and we will literally go through for hours on end trying to figure out what can I watch. There's nothing to watch. You literally have 100,000. I mean, we come from a generation that flicked through channels. We were at the mercy of people. They told us what we were going to watch when we watched it. And yet now we're in this place where we get to choose what we want to watch, and yet we do something that's just crazy. Us back in the day, we're like, ugh, reruns. I hate it. I've already seen it. Now you got another generation coming up. Yay, reruns. Let's watch this again. This is where we're at. We're at a place where we want to be with the familiar. Even to the point where to try something new, to step out, it's nerve-wracking. And I was always asked this question: why is it so difficult for people to come to church? Why is it so difficult? And I've preached in churches all across the world. I constantly do this for a living. And I'm often met with the same question from the pastors, in that, it's easy to kind of deal with the membership base, but it's hard to get people to come in. And I wouldn't have been able to answer them properly if God hadn't put me through my own personal journey. So in 2021, I was called into my pastor's office, where I was serving as an associate pastor at the time. And even to this day, I couldn't necessarily give you the full scale as to why this conversation happened. But I came in thinking it was just going to be an update meeting, nothing big, nothing crazy. I sat down in front of my pastor, his wife was there, and this turned into a 3-hour meeting of everything that which I did wrong as a pastor, to the point where I was literally told in that meeting, I think it's best if you and your family go worship somewhere else. I still don't know why to this day. Couldn't tell you why. But a church to which I'd been serving in for years, is now casting me out, and I couldn't tell you why. I didn't know why. And on top of that, that was a Friday. I couldn't sleep the entire weekend. I would just stare at my ceiling. So oftentimes even just break down in tears, because he wasn't just a pastor, he was a friend. And the church that I went to wasn't just a church, but it was a family. And now I've been casted out, and I don't know why, and no one can tell me. And I was broken, and I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. And on Monday, I go into work completely depressed. I get an email that comes through, and we had signed a lease at our condo in Toronto. And we've been living for about 9 months on that new contract lease that which we signed and we sent in. And here's the interesting part. The third party that which we had used to lease the apartment or the condo decided that they didn't sign it. And so because they didn't sign it, the contract wasn't void. And so they decided they were going to sell the condo. And so even though we had signed a multi-year lease to renew, they decided, well, because we didn't sign it, the contract's not valid. You have 3 months to leave. And so we began to scramble trying to find a place to live. Being Toronto, in which it was, we didn't know where to turn, we didn't know where to go. So we ended up booting out to Kitchener. Pretty much a place where we found a place that was big enough for my family, big enough for us to live in, but at the same time affordable for us to live in. And so we were out there. And I remember being in a new city, not really knowing anyone, and now having to go to a new church because I didn't have a home church for the first time in years. I didn't have a home church. I didn't know where to go. And I went through this painstaking process of having to find a new church. You know, on the face of it, it sounds easy, but I'm telling you, church, it was insanely difficult. It was so hard. I would walk into a church where I didn't know anybody. I mean, think about it. You walk into a building, you don't know a single person. You're there by yourself. You don't know anybody. You don't know the pastor. You don't know the members. You don't even know how worship is going to play out, let alone how the pastor is going to deliver the sermon. You don't know anything about these churches as you walk into it. For me, as a veteran Christian who served as a pastor, it was nerve-wracking. Now, I want you to just take this in for a moment. How much more so those who just accepted Christ or don't know Christ are going to be able to walk through those doors? To a church they don't know, to a people they don't know. Maybe sometimes because church is often culture-related now within Ontario, to a culture they don't know. This is the difficulty that we face. But the truth is that because so many of us go to the same church for a very long time, and often in the church that which we go to is connected to a culture that which we can relate to, and I see it all across not just Ontario but Canada, and especially in the U.S. as well. It's this form of comfortability that we develop, even within the church, to the point where we're so comfortable we have just an automatic routine. I mean, has anyone here actually ever driven? If you work at a place that you've been working at for a very, very long time, let's say 5 years plus, right? I'm pretty sure some of you have done this. You get in a car, you get to work, you have no idea how you got to work. You went into you muscle memory drove to work because you've done that trip so many times. You do it like 5 times a week, right? And you just kind of don't even think about it. You're in your own head as you're driving to work. You're not thinking about making that left. You're not thinking about turning down that street. You're not even thinking about your speed limit. Everything is on cruise control because you've just done it so much before. This is where we can find ourselves as Christians here in church. This is where we can find ourselves as Christians in our relationship with God. But God did something different. And this is what I love about God. In verse 21 to verse 24, this is where now remember, Esau gave up his birthright. In a previous chapter, Esau gave up his birthright to Jacob. and that he was starving to the point where he asked Jacob for food. And so Jacob said, okay, fine, I'll give you some food, but you need to give me your birthright. And so Esau gave him his birthright. And so now we're seeing this unfold. We're seeing the fact that Isaac is about to bless Esau, even though Esau technically gave up his birthright to Jacob. And so now Jacob and his mom are seeing this, and they're saying, this is our moment, this is our time to take advantage of it. Here's the interesting thing. Even though Esau gave up his birthright, it seems like nobody said anything. We're reading this passage as if no one said it. I mean, Jacob's mom didn't go to Isaac and say, hey, did you know Esau gave up his birthright? Jacob didn't go to Isaac and say, hey, Esau gave up his birthright. Nor did Esau specify to his father, I gave up my birthright. In fact, what we're seeing is that even though Esau gave up his birthright, we're now seeing Isaac saying, go hunt game for me, make me food so that I may bless you. And he does it as if, this never happened, but yet it did. And nobody said anything. And the interesting part about this is that Bible scholars believe that nothing was said solely because even if Isaac knew that Esau gave up his birthright, it still would not have mattered. Why? Because they see how culture plays out in church today. And how we see culture play out in church today is that more often than not, culture supersedes biblical principle. And so because this act within the Jewish culture is so profound and so impactful, it is one of the most important parts of their culture where the father gets to hand down a great blessing upon the eldest son, that if Isaac knew, he would not have cared. And he still would have blessed Esau instead of Jacob. But I love the fact that in all the commotion of this, Isaac decided to bless Esau at an old age when he couldn't see. The Bible says his eyes were dimmed. His eyes were dimmed. And it even got to the point where in the process of this blessing begins to happen, Isaac begins to catch on. He calls in Esau, and yet at the same time, Jacob comes in, and Isaac begins to question this. He goes, this doesn't sound like Esau. This sounds like Jacob. Come near to me. Come near to me so that I may smell you. Come near to me that I may touch you. And of course, the mom and Jacob, being masters at deception, begin to clothe Jacob and put that smell on him and make him all hairy like Esau was. And so this is why Isaac's now saying, the voice is Jacob, but the smell and the feel is of Esau. And I love the fact that Isaac could not see the difference. Isaac had to do something here. He had to go out on a limb and trust that it was Esau before him and not Jacob. And I love the fact that God blinds Isaac in this whole process, because if God didn't blind Isaac, this story may have folded out differently. And this is often what we tend to forget, in that sometimes when things are important to us, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's important to God. I think that God views a lot of things within our lives important, but understand that God has a blueprint. He has a point A to point B. He has creation, and then he has revelation, right? And there is a process that which needs to play out. And sometimes we cannot see the bigger picture. Sometimes we can only see what is in front of us and what we want and what we desire, and yet forget to ask God, what is your purpose in this? What is it that you want of me, Father? And so God steps in and blinds Isaac. In other words, God didn't just step in and blind Isaac, but what God did was he stepped in and he superseded tradition. God superseded culture for his purpose to play out. For his very purpose to play out. And so he blinds Isaac, and through the process, Isaac then blesses Jacob in order for God's promise to be fulfilled. In the whole process of me trying to find a new church, there was a point in time where I told God I was done with ministry. I remember I had failed countless times in ministry prior to this, but this I was done. I left the church, tears in my eyes, saying, Father, if you ever want me back in ministry, you're going to have to not just open doors, you're going to have to blow them open. I want like signs from heaven in this scenario. Otherwise, I'm not going back. And when I was in a place out in Kitchener, I had 3 other churches give me a call, finding out that I was no longer part of that church, no longer an associate there, asking me to come on board with them, to be a pastor at their church. And there was a part of me that wanted to take it to prove those who hurt me wrong. There was a part of me that wanted to take it because it wasn't just about the pastor, but keep in mind it was even about the members, right? When people leave church, we often, there are just rumors and lies, especially when hurt people are involved. People say things. Church people can often be very difficult and hard people sometimes, very judgmental people at times. It's interesting that in the process of this, I found more comfort in my friends who weren't even Christians as compared to those who were Christians. And it breaks my heart in that scenario. But I wanted to prove, not just to the pastor, but to the members and to the church, that there was still a calling upon my life. But I remember God stepping in and saying, if you take these positions, you're just going to bleed out into the congregation. You're going to spread your hurt and your pain, and you're never going to be able to minister to them the way I need you to minister to them. And I took this, and I was just, but God, I still want to do something. I want to serve you. And it all goes back to God put me in a new city, a new place, new people, new church. And what I found was me trying to revert back to what I know. Me trying to do things on how I knew how to do them based off of my skills, based off of my experience and my talents. Not realizing that God had put me in a place where none of those things mattered. All my experience in ministry was void. All my talents useless. All of my skill sets just put off to the side as I just simply sat and waited as God put me through a whole new experience. And God brought me to this verse in 1 Peter 5. I didn't add it to the email list that I sent Pastor Arian. As I was reading and going through my notes last night, God put this scripture upon my heart to remind me what it is he gave me. And it's in 1 Peter 5, verse 6 and 7. I just want to read this quickly, and this is where I'll end here. So it's 1 Peter 5, verses 6 to 7, and it reads, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your cares upon him, for he cares for you." I love the fact that this verse starts off by saying, humble yourselves. In other words, the ability to humble ourselves is to pretty much cast aside our pride, what we know and what we have to offer in this world, and say, I'm nothing, Father. As I kneel before you, I am absolutely nothing, but rather just simply a vessel ready to be used by you. But then the verse goes into something else immediately after. Immediately after, in verse 7, it says, but casting all your cares. And I find it interesting that sometimes, even in my job today, I'm asked, in all honesty, sometimes I'm asked to do the impossible. I'm literally asked to do the impossible for my job. If you kind of think about some of the dynamics that I have to do, it's hands down like the most. I have to build a ministry from the ground up all across Ontario. It's almost next to impossible. And I can either choose to stay up every single night worrying about how I'm going to do it, trying to figure out what I know and how I know, my experiences that God gave me, and the talents that I have to be able to use in order to make this happen. Or I could do what the Bible tells me to do, and that is humble myself by casting my cares at the feet of Jesus. Because, church, like I said, when we face difficult issues, when we face hardships, when we face problems, the very first thing that we do is we often rely upon what we know and how we can handle it, the experiences that we can apply to it, the talents that we can add to it. And yet sometimes God is saying, I did not call you to walk by your talents. I did not call you to walk by your sight. I did not call you to walk by your own understanding. But there are moments and times where God puts us in a place where he is asking you to walk by faith, by simply taking everything that which you thought you knew how to do something, putting it aside, humbling yourself at the feet of Christ, and simply saying, I know nothing, teach me. I don't know how to do this. Teach me. You've put me in this place of uncomfortability. Show me how to get through it. Rather than me simply trying to take hold of the situation. I even see this in young ministers all the time. Sometimes I gotta grab them by the scruff because I watch them go into a new church that they've never been in a culture that they have no experience in, sometimes in a country that they've never been in. And the very first thing which they try to do is they try to replicate ministry from Canada and bring it into the church. I told them, no. What are you doing? He goes, well, this is all I know how to do it. And I said, well, God didn't bring you here to get you to do something that you already know how to do. God brought you here to teach you something that you didn't know. And this is why sometimes God puts us in a place of uncomfortability. This is why God blinded Isaac. And sometimes God puts us in a situation where he blinds us so that we can't see the next step. Because if we can't see it, then we can't plan it. And if we can't plan it, then guess what? We take ourselves out of the situation. We remove ourselves from the equation. And we finally allow God to step in and take the place that he should have taken right from the beginning. And that was control of the situation. That's what God wants from us. Trusting in God's heart. And sometimes we get to a place where we think we know better than God. But I want church you to understand, trust in God's heart. This is the same God who said he will leave the 99 for the one. He will leave the 99 for the one. He calls the unlikely. He has a heart for the lost, for the poor, for the needy, and for the weak. And above all else, he has a heart for you. And so as we head into this Christmas time, ask yourselves, Father, how can I step out into a place of the unknown? A place where I don't know how to do something, a place of uncomfortableness, where that you might be able to use me for your glory and for your will. If you could just stand upon your feet and we can close out in prayer.